Blood is a connective tissue, and it is unique among the connective tissues because it is the only connective tissue that has a largely fluid component associated with it. So blood, like all connective tissues, has two main components, the cells and the extracellular matrix. The cells are the living blood cells, as well as cell fragments, which are collectively referred to as the formed elements. The extracellular matrix is a non-living fluid that is called plasma. So we'll start by discussing the extracellular matrix component of blood tissue. And this is a material that's called plasma. Plasma is a light yellow, straw-colored fluid. So what is plasma? It is mostly composed of water, but it also has over 100 different substances dissolved within it. Water composes approximately 90% of plasma volume. It functions as the medium that dissolves the blood substances, and it also functions as the heat absorber for blood. So water is really good at absorbing heat from the body's tissues, as well as holding on to that heat. Plasma also contains a number of important electrolytes that aid in things like water balance, fluid pressure by osmosis, as well as blood pH. The major cations, which are the elements that have a positive charge, are things like sodium, potassium, and calcium. Sodium, which is important because it helps to maintain water balance of the blood through osmotic pressure. Potassium helps with normal heart function as well as heart rhythm and maintaining those. And calcium is important in normal muscle and nervous system function, and it's also an important component of the bone minerals. The major anions, which are elements that have a negative charge, are things like chloride, phosphate, and bicarbonate. A chloride, which very similar to sodium, helps to function in maintaining the blood plasma water levels by osmosis. Phosphate is an important component in bone minerals, just like calcium is, as well as an important component of ATP, which is the ATP in cellular energy. Bicarbonate is a molecule that helps to buffer the blood, and that is, it helps to prevent large-scale changes in pH. Plasma also contains a number of proteins. So even though proteins only make up about 7 to 8% of weight of the plasma, they are extremely important to normal blood function. So let's look at a few of these proteins, starting with a protein called albumin. And albumin is the most abundant of the plasma proteins. It makes up about 60% of the plasma proteins, and it is produced by the liver. Its major role is that it is the main contributor to osmotic pressure within the blood. So that is, its presence in the blood helps to keep water in the bloodstream by helping to draw water out of the tissues and keep it in the blood. It also helps to carry molecules through the blood. In particular, it acts as a vehicle for things like fatty acids as well as steroid hormones, which are both lipid-based substances. So recall that fats and lipids are not water-soluble. We refer to them as hydrophobic. And so that means that in the blood they require a protein carrier like albumin in order to be transported through the bloodstream. So let's review osmotic pressure and osmosis for a second, because the main function of albumin is functioning in keeping water in the bloodstream by osmotic pressure. So let's take a quick review of that. So let's assume that we have two compartments, compartment A on the left in this diagram and compartment B on the right. And these two compartments are separated by a semi-permeable barrier like a plasma membrane. So water can pass through this membrane by osmosis, but the red particles that are suspended within those two fluid compartments cannot pass through the plasma membrane. So in this diagram, the red particles will represent albumin, since albumin is a protein that is both hydrophilic, that is, it is able to be dissolved in water, but it's also a very large protein, so it has a difficult time moving across the plasma membrane. So also recall in general that anything that's dissolved in water takes up space that would otherwise be occupied by water. So therefore, compartment A has less water than compartment B because compartment A has more albumin in it. So because that albumin is taking up space that would otherwise be occupied by water, that means that compartment A is going to have less water than compartment B is. So which direction, based on the graphic, should water be drawn by diffusion? That is, what direction should water diffuse? And we see that it should diffuse from compartment B to compartment A because water will diffuse from areas where water is in high concentration, that is, water is in high concentration in compartment B. It will diffuse to areas of lower concentration, which in this example is compartment A because compartment A has more albumin in it. So if the liver is going to build proteins like albumin, it needs to have all of the necessary amino acids for constructing those proteins. In poor countries where people have low protein diets because meats are expensive and many people cannot afford to buy them, we see that as a result of that, we see that their livers are not capable of making enough proteins like albumin. And that's because that these people are not getting all of the proper amino acids from their diet in order for their liver to construct those proteins. So what does this mean for the blood? It means that there are more proteins in the tissues than there are in the blood, and as a result, water will tend to diffuse out of the bloodstream and stay in the tissues, which causes tissue swelling as well as a condition called tissue edema, where fluid is retained by those tissues. Globulins are another major protein group that's found in the blood. There are a couple of different types of globulins, the alpha, beta, and gamma globulins. The alpha and beta globulins are produced by the liver, and that is, they function as mostly as transporters, so they carry lipids, fatty acids, or fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. The gamma globulins are actually produced by the plasma cells, which develop from a type of lymphocyte called a B lymphocyte of the immune system. These are produced during immune system responses. So we also see that the gamma globulins are referred to as antibodies, and antibodies, which also go by yet another term called immunoglobulins, function to tag foreign cells or materials so that the immune system knows to destroy those. And finally, the last protein we'll take a look at is called fibrinogen. It is an inactive form of a protein called fibrin, and fibrin helps to form the fibrous threads that assist with blood clotting. So essentially, fibrinogen is a fibrin precursor. And we'll see that fibrinogen is activated only when blood clotting is activated, because if blood clotting is not activated, we don't want clots to form spontaneously or randomly in our bloodstream. So what are some other components that are found in plasma? There are non-protein nitrogen-containing substances that are waste byproducts of metabolism, and these are typically removed by the kidneys and excreted in the urine. There are also organic nutrients like carbohydrates, amino acids, and fatty acids. We'll see that the digestive system uses enzymes to break down sugars into carbohydrates, proteins into amino acids, and lipids into fatty acids, and glycerol as well as triglycerides. And this breakdown by enzymes makes these substances small enough so that they can be absorbed into the bloodstream. We will also see that the blood carries gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen is primarily bound to a protein in red blood cells that's called hemoglobin, while carbon dioxide is typically converted into bicarbonate and then transported through the blood as bicarbonate. And finally, we see that the plasma also serves to carry hormones. So amino acid-based hormones are hormones that can be dissolved in water because they are hydrophilic. Meanwhile, steroid and thyroid hormones are typically carried by albumin because they are hydrophobic hydrophobic hormones, and so they need to be carried by plasma proteins.